I'd be without you.
It was the mid-1960s. The Beatles ruled the charts, the Beach Boys ruled the waves, and the two biggest bands on earth were secretly trying to outdo each other in the studio. And then came a song that stopped Paul McCartney in his tracks. Not just any song, God Only Knows. A track so hauntingly beautiful, so musically bold, that McCartney would later call it the greatest song ever written. Let that sink in. The man behind Let It Be, Yesterday, Hey Jude, says his all-time favorite wasn't written by Lennon or himself, but by Brian Wilson, the soft-spoken genius behind the Beach Boys. But this wasn't just about admiration. Behind the praise was a rivalry. Quiet, classy, but fiercely competitive. These two musical giants were locked in an invisible arms race. Each album wasn't just art. It was a move on the chessboard. The Beatles dropped Rubber Soul. Brian fired back with Pet Sounds. Then came God Only Knows, and everything changed. But how did this seemingly gentle ballad become a weapon in one of the most important musical rivalries of the 20th century? Why did McCartney say it made him cry every single time? And what secret ingredients did Brian Wilson mix into this song to make it feel so timeless and so spiritually unsettling? Let's rewind the clock, because the story behind God Only Knows isn't just a tale of harmony and melody, but a tale of obsession, heartbreak, risk, and genius. In December 1965, the Beatles released Rubber Soul, and everything changed. Brian Wilson was already a musical mastermind, but when he dropped the needle on that album, he wasn't just impressed. He was stunned. It blew my mind, he later said, the harmonies, the lyrical depth, the production. Rubber Soul wasn't just pop, it was a full-blown artistic statement. And to Brian, it felt like a challenge. He didn't get angry, he got inspired. He turned to his bandmates and said, "We've got to top this." So while the rest of the Beach Boys hit the road for another tour, Brian stayed home. He locked himself in the studio, chasing an idea, something that could go toe-to-toe with what Lennon and McCartney had just done. This wasn't new. The friendly back and forth had been simmering for a while. Back in 1964, I Get Around became the Beach Boys' first US #1 hit. It was punchy, clever, and it proved that Brian wasn't just writing surf songs, he was shaping sound. The Beatles noticed. The respect was mutual. But make no mistake, each new release was a move in a larger game. Paul would later describe it as a constant effort to one-up each other, not out of spite, but out of admiration. Like two painters in the same studio hearing each other's work through the wall and thinking, okay, now watch this. Brian's answer to Rubber Soul wasn't just another Beach Boys record. It was Pet Sounds, an album that would redefine pop, rewire how music was made, and set the stage for something even more powerful. Because buried deep in that album was a song that would soon change everything. While the rest of the Beach Boys were still chasing applause on tour, Brian Wilson was chasing something else, something bigger. He stepped away from the spotlight, walked off the stage, and into the studio. It wasn't burnout, it was obsession. Brian wasn't interested in topping charts anymore. He wanted to top expectations. He wanted to create something so rich, so emotional, and so musically advanced that it would make Rubber Soul look like a warm-up act. That something would become Pet Sounds. But Brian couldn't do it alone. He needed someone who could put words to the emotions swirling in his head. Enter Tony Asher, a jingle writer with no rock pedigree but a deep understanding of human feeling. Together, they were an unlikely duo. Brian, the intuitive genius who thought in harmonies, and Tony, the grounded lyricist who asked the right questions. Their collaboration wasn't about writing hits, it was about writing honestly. They peeled back the layers of pop and aimed for something more personal. Heartache, isolation, longing, the kind of emotions most bands wouldn't dare pack into 3-minute songs. The result? A sound unlike anything anyone had heard before. Instead of the usual Beach Boys surf and sand themes, Pet Sounds emerged as a lush, orchestral symphony of sadness and beauty. Brian used Baroque instruments, French horns, harpsichords, even bicycle bells. He layered vocal harmonies like brushstrokes on a canvas. Every note felt intentional, every lyric raw. This wasn't background music. It was a full-body experience. Some critics didn't get it. The record label wasn't sure what to do with it. But those who understood, they knew they were listening to a turning point in music history. And at the center of it all was one track that stood out. A song so delicate, so soul-piercing that it seemed to rise above the rest of the album entirely. God Only Knows wasn't just a highlight. It was the emotional heart of Pet Sounds, and the way Brian created it would stun even the most seasoned musicians. By 1966, Brian Wilson wasn't just composing songs, he was building soundscapes. And when it came time to create God Only Knows, he didn't just write it, he sculpted it. It started, like most masterpieces do, with a quiet idea. Brian sat down at the piano and played a few gentle chords. They didn't sound like much at first, soft, almost hesitant. But what emerged from that moment would become one of the most hauntingly beautiful songs ever recorded. To help bring the vision to life, Brian turned again to Tony Asher. They wanted the song to feel honest, vulnerable, spiritual. A love song, yes, but not in the traditional Hearts and Flowers way. This one had a deeper ache. It said, "I may not always love you." A first line so bold it almost got the song scrapped on the spot. But that was the point. This wasn't bubblegum pop. It was emotional excavation. The structure of God Only Knows broke nearly every rule of radio-friendly music at the time. It used inverted chords, ambiguous tonality, and key modulations that felt more classical than Californian. Brian added instruments that had no business being in a pop song. French horn, accordion, sleigh bells. He brought in the Wrecking Crew, LA's elite session musicians, and had them play part after part, layering the sound like a symphony. And when it came time for vocals, he did something even more unexpected. He handed the lead to his younger brother, Carl Wilson. Carl's voice, tender, pure, aching, fit the song like sunlight on water. Ryan knew it from the start. Carl had the right soul for it, he later said, but it wasn't just the melody that carried the emotion. The counterpoint vocals, the subtle shifts in harmony, the way the parts weaved in and out of each other. It didn't sound like a pop song. It sounded like a prayer. And then there was the fade out. Instead of closing the song with a bang, Brian let it dissolve gently, repeating the same phrase in overlapping rounds until it felt like the music itself was floating away. It was intimate, unresolved, and deeply human. Even the title, God Only Knows, was controversial. Radio stations feared backlash for including God in a pop song. Some refused to play it, but Brian refused to change it. He believed it was essential, that those words captured the depth of feeling no other phrase could. In the end, God Only Knows wasn't just composed, it was felt. And when the Beach Boys finally released it, it didn't just land, it lingered. It left listeners wondering, how could something so simple hurt so beautifully? And someone else was wondering that too, across the Atlantic. When God Only Knows drifted through the airwaves in 1966, it didn't come crashing into the world like a thunderclap. It arrived like a sigh, soft, unassuming, and yet it hit harder than anything else playing on the radio. And thousands of miles away, one man sat in silence, completely floored. That man was Paul McCartney. Now, Paul wasn't easy to impress. He'd written Yesterday, Eleanor Rigby, and Michelle, but when he heard God Only Knows, he didn't just like it, he was shattered by it. Years later, he would call it the greatest song ever written. Not just a compliment, an admission, an emotional surrender from one of the greatest songwriters in history. And this wasn't just talk. In 2002, decades after the Beach Boys first released the track, Paul joined Brian Wilson on stage for a performance. During soundcheck, something unexpected happened. As the first notes of God Only Knows played, Paul broke down in tears. He had to stop. He couldn't get through it. This was no longer just a rivalry. This was reverence. The Beach Boys had done something the Beatles never quite did. They cracked open the human heart in 3 minutes, without ego, without pretense, and Paul felt it. But if you think the Beatles let that moment pass without a response, think again. That same year, 1966, they began working on what would become their boldest, strangest, most ambitious album yet. Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And behind that psychedelic cover and revolutionary concept was a spark that came from Pet Sounds. Paul admitted it. Pet Sounds pushed him, inspired him, made him want to go deeper. This wasn't imitation. It was escalation. One artist recognizing the genius of another and rising to meet it. Because that's what great artists do. They don't run from the competition. They embrace it. They grow from it. And through it all, God Only Knows remained untouched. A song so personal, so aching, that even the Beatles never tried to copy it. It stood alone. A love song, written like a prayer, and its impact didn't end in the 60s. In fact, it never really ended at all. Some songs topped charts, others top hearts. God Only Knows did both, and then some. When it was first released, it didn't explode in the US the way it should have. Radio stations hesitated. The word God in the title was considered too risky, too sacred, too controversial for top 40 pop. Some stations refused to spin it altogether. But that didn't stop it. The people who heard it, really heard it, knew it was something different, something deeper. It didn't beg for attention. It whispered straight to the soul, and slowly, God Only Knows became a kind of musical heirloom. A sacred track passed down through generations of artists and fans who felt its quiet power. Musicians studied it like scripture. Songwriters quoted it like gospel. And critics, they couldn't stop praising it. Rolling Stone, Pitchfork, NME, they've all ranked it among the greatest songs of all time. Paul McCartney still calls it the most beautiful track ever written. Bono called it proof that pop could be art. Tom York of Radiohead called it absolutely perfect. But the real magic? It isn't in the lists. It's in the way the song lingers. The way its melody loops in your head long after the music ends. The way its lyrics hit harder the older you get. The way that one trembling line, God only knows what I'd be without you, feels like a whisper from your own heart. It's been covered by hundreds of artists, used in film, television, and weddings. It's been the soundtrack to both joy and grief, life and loss. And in June 2025, when the world lost Brian Wilson, God Only Knows became something else entirely. It became a eulogy. Bands across the globe played the song on loop. Tributes flooded in from legends and nobodies alike. And everywhere, from music blogs to family living rooms, people were saying the same thing. This was the one. This was the song that made me feel. Not because it was flashy or loud or trendy, but because it was honest. Brian Wilson didn't write God Only Knows to sell records. He wrote it to express something too fragile for normal language. And that's why it lasted. Because long after the charts change, and the genres shift, and the trends fade, there will always be love, and fear, and beauty, and longing. There will always be a need for songs like this. In a world overflowing with love songs, God Only Knows stands quietly apart. It doesn't shout. It doesn't beg. It just is. A soft confession wrapped in perfect harmony. A song that somehow feels personal to everyone who hears it. And maybe that's the real miracle. Because when Brian Wilson wrote it, he wasn't chasing a hit. He was trying to articulate the kind of love that terrifies you. The kind that makes you vulnerable, the kind you can't explain, not fully, not clearly, just emotionally. And with that, he did something no rivalry could contain. He transcended it. This wasn't about the Beach Boys versus the Beatles anymore. This was about humanity, about music reaching a place even words can't touch. Brian Wilson took all the chaos inside him, all the doubt, the beauty, the anxiety, the joy, and turned it into something eternal. And something we still listen to decades later, with the same lump in our throats and ache in our chest. And for Paul McCartney, arguably the greatest songwriter of the 20th century, to say that this song was the one that brought him to tears, that tells you everything you need to know. So the next time you hear those opening notes, Don't just listen, feel it, because God Only Knows isn't just music. It's memory, it's emotion. It's a masterpiece that reminds us how fragile love is and how sacred it can be. And maybe, just maybe, that's why it still matters so much today.